The mockery begins. The cold metallic walls of Typhera 9, a floating space station on the edge of the Andromeda sector, hummed with energy. Inside the main research lab, a group of humans and aliens gathered around a large holographic display. It was a meeting of two species, an attempt to understand each other. But not everyone in the room believed in this mission. Among the alien delegation stood Veshkara, a tall, sleek-bodied creature with pale silver skin and piercing violet eyes. She was a scientist from the Cyphern Empire, an advanced alien civilization known for their intelligence and emotionless logic. Veshkara believed humans were weak, fragile beings, especially when it came to reproduction. Across the room, Dr. Alex Carter, a human scientist, observed her with cautious eyes. He had spent years studying alien cultures, but Veshkara's arrogance annoyed him more than any other alien he had encountered. She always looked down on humans, and today was no different. "Tell me again, Dr. Carter," Veshkara said in a cold, emotionless tone, "why does your species choose such a inefficient method of reproduction?" Dr. Carter sighed. "It's not a choice, Veshkara. It's how nature designed us." Veshkara smirked, crossing her arms. "Pain, weakness, emotional instability. Your species suffers so much just to bring new life into the world. It is pathetic." A murmur spread across the room. The human scientists shifted uncomfortably, while the other aliens watched in silence. One of the human researchers, Dr. Lisa Reynolds, was pregnant, 7 months along. She had been silently listening to the conversation, but now she stepped forward, her face tight with anger. "You talk as if childbirth is a joke," Lisa said, her voice steady. "But let me tell you something, Veshkara. Giving birth is not weakness. It's strength. Humans endure it because we love, because we care. That's something your kind will never understand." Veshkara raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Love, caring, irrelevant concepts. If we needed offspring, we would simply create them in laboratories. No pain, no suffering, no mess." Lisa clenched her fists. "You think you're superior because you don't experience pain." Veshkara gave a slow nod. "Pain is a sign of imperfection, and you humans are full of imperfections." Dr. Carter took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We may not be perfect, but we survive. Even in the harshest conditions, even in war, famine, and disaster. Humans push through. That's what makes us strong." Veshkara chuckled, a cold and empty sound. "If your strength comes from pain, then I am grateful that my kind has evolved beyond it." The tension in the room was thick, and everyone felt it. But before anyone could say anything else, a loud alarm blared across the station. "Warning! System error DTKT. Experiment Chamber Buriache." The lights flickered, and the holographic display glitched. Everyone turned toward the source of the problem, a restricted lab section where an experimental machine was running. Dr. Carter's heart pounded. What the hell just happened? A technician rushed in, panic on his face. "Sir, the neural sync device, it's malfunctioning. Someone activated it without proper calibration." Veshkara narrowed her eyes. "Neural sync device?" Lisa's face went pale. "Oh no, it's the machine that lets one species experience the sensations of another." Veshkara scoffed. "A pointless experiment." Dr. Carter turned to the technician. "Who was in the chamber?" The technician hesitated. It was Veshkara. A stunned silence filled the room. Veshkara blinked, confusion flashing across her face for the first time. "I did no such thing," she said. The technician shook his head. "The system logs show that the sync started, linking you to a human biological template." Lisa gasped. "Wait, if it linked to a human template, does that mean?" Before she could finish, Veshkara stumbled forward, clutching her stomach. A sharp, unnatural pain shot through her body. Her breath hitched. Something was wrong. Her violet eyes widened in shock as she dropped to one knee, her body trembling. Her mind, always so calm and controlled, was suddenly filled with an overwhelming sensation she had never known before. Pain. Real, deep, unbearable pain. A pain she had mocked. A pain she had said made humans weak. Dr. Carter rushed forward, grabbing a medical scanner. Her vitals are fluctuating. The machine linked her nervous system to a human reproductive cycle. Lisa's eyes widened. Oh my God, she's experiencing human childbirth. Veshkara gasped, sweat forming on her silver skin. This is not possible. Her voice, once filled with arrogance, now shook with fear. The experiment had forced her to experience the one thing she had mocked the most, and there was no way to stop it. The experiment gone wrong. The sterile hum of sci-fi laboratory was drowned out by Veshkara's sharp, ragged breaths. The cold, logical mind of the Zifran scientist was in complete disarray as an unfamiliar agony ripped through her body. She collapsed to her knees, her long fingers trembling against the sleek metallic floor. Her chest heaved, her limbs twitched, and her violet eyes flickered wildly as a primal fear seeped into her consciousness. Pain. Uncontrollable. Consuming. Unrelenting. The same pain she had mocked. Dr. Carter stood frozen for a second, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Moments ago, Veshkara had been scoffing at human biology. Now she was writhing in agony, her body reacting as if she were experiencing the excruciating process of human childbirth. This isn't possible, he muttered under his breath. Lisa, her face pale with shock, pushed past him and activated a medical scanner. The screen lit up, displaying Veshkara's vital signs. Erratic, unstable. Her body was undergoing rapid and unnatural changes. She's actually going through labor, Lisa whispered, horror dawning on her face. Veshkara let out a snarl, her normally calm demeanor shattered. Stop! This, she gasped. Her voice was different now, strained, shaking, desperate. The once arrogant, untouchable alien scientist was reduced to a trembling figure on the lab floor. The other Zifran delegates in the room stood motionless, their emotionless faces revealing nothing. To them, pain was an abstract concept, something primitive species like humans still suffered from. They could not comprehend what was happening to Veshkara, nor did they seem inclined to intervene. Dr. Carter snapped into action. We need to get her out of the neural sync chamber, now. The technician hesitated. Sir, the system isn't responding. It's locked in a feedback loop. Her nervous system is fully synchronized with a simulated human pregnancy. Lisa's hands tightened into fists. You mean she's trapped in it? A flickering hologram appeared above the console, displaying a biological imprint map. It was a perfect replica of a pregnant human body, but instead of a real person, the neural sync had latched onto Veshkara's body. Dr. Carter's eyes darted to Veshkara. Her normally smooth, silver-toned skin was shifting, as if adapting to the foreign biology. He turned back to the technician. How did this happen? Who linked her to the pregnancy template? The technician's face was tight with confusion. It shouldn't have been possible. The sync requires manual input. Someone, or something, forced this connection. Veshkara's breathing became ragged, her hands clawing at the floor as another wave of pain crashed over her. Her body wasn't meant for this. Her species had never evolved for this. But now, her every nerve was screaming with agony, replicating the intense labor contractions of a human woman. Lisa crouched beside her, her anger from before melting into a deep concern. Veshkara, listen to me. You need to breathe. You're in labor. Veshkara snapped her head up, her violet eyes burning with a mixture of rage and panic. I am not human, she roared, voice distorted by the pain. Her body convulsed, her muscles locking up as she struggled to suppress the sensations. But the experiment had taken hold of her completely. Her logical mind was powerless against the raw, primitive force of childbirth. Lisa exhaled sharply. It doesn't matter what you are. Right now, your body thinks it's giving birth. And if you fight it, it's only going to get worse. A sharp scream tore through the lab, a scream no Zifrin had ever made before. The sound sent chills down every human spine. Dr. Carter turned back to the console. We need to shut this system down before it kills her. The technician's fingers flew across the controls. I'm trying, but the machine won't disconnect her. It's like it's rewriting her biological structure in real time. Lisa's eyes flickered toward the display. What if this is more than just a sync issue? Dr. Carter frowned. What are you saying? Lisa hesitated before speaking, her voice low and uncertain. What if the machine isn't just making her experience childbirth? Dr. Carter narrowed his eyes. Then what else could it be doing? Lisa swallowed hard. What if it's making her actually give birth? A stunned silence filled the room. Dr. Carter turned to Veshkara. Her breathing had become erratic, her body trembling violently. The holographic scan flickered again, and something new appeared on the screen. A faint, pulsating energy signature. Something was growing. Something was coming. Lisa stepped back, her pulse racing. Oh God! Veshkara let out a guttural growl as her body lurched forward. Sweat dripped from her skin. Her claws dug into the metal floor, leaving deep gouges in the surface. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. I won't. I don't let this happen. Her body convulsed violently, her muscles seizing as another contraction rippled through her. Dr. Carter's breath caught in his throat. Lisa whispered, We need to stop this. Now. But it was too late. Veshkara's scream filled the air once more, louder, rawer, more alien than anything the humans had ever heard before. The monitors flashed red, alarms blared, and then everything shut down. The lab was plunged into complete darkness. And in that silence, something shifted. Something was born. No escape from pain. The darkness in the lab stretched for what felt like an eternity. The hum of sci-fi 9's machinery had ceased. The flashing warning lights had gone dark. And for the first time in history, a Zifrin scientist had screamed in pain. Veshkara lay sprawled on the cold metallic floor, her once pristine silver skin now glistening with sweat. Her entire body trembled, struggling against a force she had never imagined possible. Her breathing was shallow. Her claws dug into the floor, and her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held something terrifying. Fear. Dr. Carter's voice was the first to break the silence. Get the emergency lights on now. A few seconds later, the dim red glow of backup power flickered to life, casting eerie shadows over the lab. The monitors were still dead, their once active readings now frozen in time. The neural sync device had shut down, but whatever process had begun inside Veshkara had not stopped. Lisa crouched beside her, eyes scanning the alien's shaking form. She's burning up. Her body wasn't made for this. Her system is going into shock. Veshkara let out a shuddering breath, her arms shaking as she tried to push herself up. She gasped, her voice hoarse. I cannot. Stop this. Dr. Carter grabbed a medical scanner from the emergency kit, his hands moving quickly. Let's see what we're dealing with. He pressed the scanner against her skin, and the holographic display lit up, revealing something that made his stomach drop. Lisa gasped, Oh my God. The screen displayed an anomaly inside Veshkara's body. Something foreign, something living. It was not just a simulation. The sync process had done something worse than they imagined. It had made her pregnant. Lisa whispered in horror, It's not just pain. It's real. Dr. Carter shook his head, barely able to process what he was seeing. That's impossible. Zifrins don't even have the ability to reproduce biologically. Veshkara's eyes snapped open, and despite her pain, her face contorted into a look of absolute rage. You did this to me. Dr. Carter met her gaze, his voice firm. No, the machine did. She snarled, attempting to rise, but her body betrayed her. Another contraction racked through her, forcing her back down as a sharp cry escaped her lips. Lisa reached for her. "Veshkara, listen to me. Fighting it will only make it worse." Veshkara grabbed Lisa's wrist with unnatural speed, her claws pressing against her skin. "I am not human," she hissed. "I will not." Another contraction cut her off. She clutched her abdomen, her body curling in on itself. Dr. Carter's face darkened. "It doesn't matter what you are right now. Your body thinks it's giving birth, and we don't know what it's trying to deliver." The other Zifran scientists watched in complete stillness. They made no move to help, no reaction to their suffering comrade. Lisa glared at them. "Aren't you going to do anything?" One of them, Treshval, regarded her with cold detachment. "Pain is irrelevant to our kind. If she is weak enough to succumb, then she is unworthy of aid." Lisa's blood boiled. "She is your own kind. She's in pain, she's suffering, and you won't even try to help her." Treshval's expression did not change. "She has chosen to engage with humans. Perhaps now she will understand the consequences." Veshkara let out a sharp growl, forcing her head up. "Enough," she spat, her voice raw. "I will endure this." Dr. Carter exchanged a look with Lisa. She's too stubborn to accept help. But she wouldn't last long. The contractions were coming faster now, her body trembling violently with each wave of pain. Her sharp nails raked across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Lisa turned back to the medical scanner, her eyes narrowing at the fluctuating readings. Something about the energy signature inside Veshkara wasn't normal. It wasn't a fetus. It was something different. And then, the room shook. A low, guttural vibration rippled through the air. The laboratory lights flickered again, and the emergency monitors began flashing erratic data streams. Veshkara let out a ragged breath, her body convulsing once more. But this time, something shifted inside her. Something alive. Lisa's heart pounded. "Carter, we have a problem." The scanner readings spiked wildly, and for the first time, a new sound filled the lab. A sound that sent a chill down every human spine. A low, inhuman heartbeat. Veshkara felt it too. Her eyes widened, her fingers tightening into fists as a look of absolute horror passed over her face. "This," she choked, "this is not supposed to happen." Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then what the hell is growing inside you?" Veshkara trembled, her mind struggling to comprehend. Her species did not carry offspring. They did not create life in this way. And yet, something inside her was alive. The monitors blared a new warning. "Foreign entity detected. Rapid development in progress." Dr. Carter stepped back, his mind racing. If it was growing this fast, then what would happen when it was born? Veshkara's body jerked violently, her head snapping back as a deep, guttural snarl ripped from her throat. The pain had transformed into something else, something primal. She was changing. Lisa grabbed Dr. Carter's arm. "We need to stop this. Now." But before they could move, Veshkara let out one final, agonized scream. The room was swallowed in a pulse of energy, blinding white light flooding every corner of the lab. The sound of shattering glass and metal filled the air. And in the middle of it all, where Veshkara had been writhing in pain, something else had taken her place, alien in labor. A pulse of energy rippled through the lab, knocking over equipment and sending sparks flying from overloaded circuits. The red emergency lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The once sterile lab now felt like something out of a nightmare, a place where logic and science had lost control. Dr. Carter shielded his eyes from the blinding light, his ears ringing from the explosion of energy. For a moment, everything was silent. The lab monitors were dead. The Zifran scientists stood frozen, and Lisa's sharp breaths were the only sound he could register. Then, a guttural, primal growl cut through the silence. Carter turned toward the source, his stomach tightening as he took in the scene before him. Veshkara was no longer on the floor. She was floating. Her body hovered a few feet above the ground, her limbs twitching as if she were being pulled in different directions by an invisible force. The sleek silver of her skin glowed unnaturally, the color shifting in waves, flickering between Zifran physiology and something else entirely. Something new. Her violet eyes snapped open, but they were no longer hers. A second pair of irises had formed within them, glowing with a faint golden hue. Lisa grabbed Carter's arm. What the hell is happening to her? Carter could only shake his head. I don't know. This isn't just a pregnancy. Something's rewriting her DNA. A sudden, bone-deep crack echoed in the room. Veshkara's body jerked violently, her back arching as a new wave of contractions racked through her. Her fingers clawed at the air, her breathing now erratic, desperate. I will not let this control me, she snarled through gritted teeth, but her voice was wrong. It sounded layered, as if two voices spoke at once. Lisa's face paled. She's fighting it. Her body is rejecting whatever's growing inside her. Carter's mind raced. The neural sync device had been designed to mimic pain, to allow one species to experience another's biology. But this wasn't just mimicry anymore. The machine hadn't just cinced her with human childbirth. It had transformed her into something capable of it. Lisa stepped closer, carefully avoiding the overturned lab equipment. Veshkara, listen to me. You need to let us help you. Veshkara's head snapped toward her. Her eyes glowed brighter, and for a brief moment, Carter thought she might attack. Then, another contraction hit. A violent shockwave of pain burst from her body, shaking the lab once more. Lisa and Carter were knocked off balance, barely catching themselves against the counter. The Zifran delegation, still standing coldly on the sidelines, finally moved. Treshval, the leader of the Zifran scientists, took a single step forward. His expression remained blank, emotionless. She is no longer one of us. Lisa glared at him. What the hell does that mean? Treshval tilted his head slightly. She has allowed human contamination. She is impure. Lisa's anger boiled over. She didn't allow anything. She was forced into this, and if you won't help her, then stay the hell out of the way. But Treshval wasn't listening. His gaze remained locked on Veshkara, as if analyzing a failed experiment. If she survives, she is no longer Zifran. If she dies, then nature has corrected itself. Veshkara let out a ragged breath, her body shuddering. You will do nothing, she growled, her voice filled with rage. You stand and watch while I suffer. She clenched her fists, and suddenly, the lights shattered. Glass rained down from the ceiling as a wave of energy exploded outward from her body. Lisa let out a gasp. Oh my God. Veshkara's body jerked violently, her muscles tensing as the energy pulsed again. Then, the heartbeat returned. Faster. Stronger. Lisa clutched her chest. It's happening. It's coming. Carter grabbed his med scanner, forcing the malfunctioning display to flicker back to life. The readings were erratic, fluctuating wildly, but one thing was clear. Whatever was inside Veshkara was almost fully developed, and it was trying to get out. Veshkara's breathing hitched, her body curling inward as she let out an inhuman scream. Her voice warped, the sound both familiar and completely alien at the same time. Her body was no longer entirely hers. Lisa rushed forward, grabbing Veshkara's hand. Listen to me. You need to push. Veshkara snapped her head up, pure fury burning in her golden-ringed eyes. I do. Not. Push. Another shockwave of energy. Carter covered his face as the force rattled the entire station. Lisa clenched her jaw. I don't care how evolved you think you are. You're giving birth. You either push or whatever's inside you is going to rip its own way out. Veshkara snarled, but this time, it was a sound of fear. Lisa softened slightly. You're not alone in this. Veshkara's breathing hitched, her face twisted with pain and confusion. For the first time in her existence, she understood human suffering. And worse, she understood human vulnerability. Her body shuddered as the final contraction hit like a tidal wave. A piercing, screeching noise echoed through the room. Something alive, but not fully formed. The Zifrins stepped back. Treshval's eyes narrowed. "It is coming." Lisa squeezed Veshkara's hand. One more. Veshkara's claws raked across the ground. Her body tensed, then convulsed. And then, the sound of splitting flesh, a final scream, a flash of golden light, and then silence. Veshkara collapsed onto the floor, gasping, trembling. Lisa slowly turned her gaze downward. Something lay there, surrounded by a faint, shimmering glow. Something small, something alive. Carter's breath caught in his throat. "What is that?" Lisa stared at it, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not a baby." The glow flickered. The small form stirred. And then, as its eyes snapped open, they saw something none of them were prepared for. Something not fully Zifran. Something not fully human. Something new. The ultimate lesson. A chilling silence spread across the lab. The air, once thick with tension, now felt unnaturally still. Veshkara lay motionless, her chest heaving as her body trembled from the ordeal she had just endured. Her once pristine silver skin was now dull and damp, her muscles slack, as if every ounce of her energy had been drained. She was a being who had never known weakness, until now. And yet, despite the exhaustion written across her face, her violet gold eyes remained open, wide, terrified, because she was staring at it. Everyone in the lab was. The thing that had just been born. A small pulsing form lay in the center of the room, encased in a faint golden glow. Its shape was shifting, unstable, flickering between something humanoid and something else. Its skin was translucent, its body partially formless, as if it hadn't yet decided what it was supposed to be. Lisa clutched Carter's arm. "Tell me you are seeing this." Carter swallowed hard. "I see it. I just don't know what the hell I'm looking at." Then it moved. A sharp intake of breath swept across the lab as the small entity stirred, its body rippling like liquid light. Its movements were unnatural, graceful but unsettling. The golden glow around it shimmered, and then, for the first time, it opened its eyes. Lisa froze. Its eyes were not human, not Zifran. They were something in between, something entirely new. Golden irises surrounded by shifting violet rings. Veshkara's breath hitched. It had her eyes. The Zifran delegation remained motionless, their faces impassive as they observed the unnatural birth. But there was something behind their cold stares, a flicker of something they never displayed. Fear. Treshval took a slow step forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Terminated." Lisa's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me." Treshval's voice remained calm, emotionless. "It is an anomaly. A contamination. It should not exist." Veshkara's body tensed. Even in her weakened state, her fingers curled into fists. Her head turned, locking onto the Zifran leader. Carter's voice was sharp. "You can't be serious. This isn't some mistake in a lab experiment. This is..." Treshval cut him off. "An unnatural creation. A mutation. It must be eliminated before it spreads." Lisa stepped in front of the creature instinctively, her hands shaking. "It's not a disease. It's alive. And it's part of her now." Veshkara, despite her exhaustion, slowly pushed herself upright. Her body still trembled, but her expression had hardened into something unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply stared at the small being, watching as it blinked, twitched, and breathed. Then, in a voice hoarse but steady, she finally spoke. "No." Treshval's gaze snapped to her. "You do not have the authority to deny this." Veshkara's glowing eyes burned into him. "I carried this." she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with something undeniable. I suffered this. She took a shaky breath. And now I understand. Carter watched her closely. This wasn't just physical pain anymore. This was something deeper. Something human. She turned to Lisa, her gaze unreadable. You knew. You told me this was strength. Lisa nodded, still wary. It is. Veshkara's fingers twitched. She looked at her hands, as if seeing them for the first time. I always thought suffering was a sign of weakness. That pain was an imperfection. Her jaw clenched. But now I see. Pain is survival. Lisa exhaled slowly. It always has been. Veshkara turned back to Treshval, her golden-rimmed eyes flashing. And I survived. Treshval remained still, but something in his expression had shifted, just slightly. Veshkara slowly looked at the small entity, the glowing childlike being that had come from her, and something unreadable flickered in her gaze. She had mocked human childbirth. She had insulted their way of life. And yet she had been forced to endure it. And in doing so, she had become something else, something her own kind would never accept. A deep, shuddering breath left her lips. You fear it because it is unknown. Treshval's expression remained cold. The unknown is irrelevant. What is relevant is that it cannot be allowed to exist. Veshkara's shoulders squared. Her body was still weak, but her stance was strong. Then neither can I. A sharp silence filled the room. Treshval's fingers twitched slightly. A subtle movement, but in Zifran terms, it was as close to shock as one could display. Lisa's eyes widened. Wait, you're saying? Veshkara nodded slowly. I am no longer purely Zifran. I am something else now. Her eyes locked onto the glowing childlike entity before her. It stared back, unblinking. Lisa took a small step forward, voice cautious. And what do you want to do about that? Veshkara exhaled through her nose. I want to understand it. Treshval's face hardened. Then you are lost. Veshkara's expression remained calm. No, I have been found. For the first time in her existence, she understood what it meant to suffer, and what it meant to survive. And now, she had a choice. She could return to her people, who would see her as a contaminated anomaly. Or she could step forward, toward the unknown. A slow, cold smile touched her lips. You have always seen humans as weak, but they have survived wars, death, pain. And now, I understand why. She reached out, hesitating only a second, before gently touching the newborn entity's shimmering form. She did not pull away. She did not reject it. She accepted it. And for the first time in history, a Zifran scientist made a choice based on something other than logic. She made a choice based on something human. The child blinked and smiled. Carter whispered, Well, Dan. Lisa exhaled. What happens now? Veshkara's golden-violet eyes gleamed. Now, she murmured. Now, we evolve. The last push. The air inside sci-fi 9's laboratory was thick with tension, a mixture of uncertainty, fear, and something far more dangerous, change. Veshkara, once a proud Zifran scientist, now sat on the cold metallic floor, weakened, trembling, and transformed. Her once pristine silver skin was still damp with sweat, her body still aching from an experience she had always dismissed as pathetic. And yet, despite everything, the pain, the loss of control, the fear of the unknown, her golden-violet eyes did not hold defeat. They held defiance. The entity, the child born from her unnatural ordeal, hovered in front of her, its small, pulsing form flickering between shapes. It was neither Zifran nor human, and yet, it was both. A new being, a new possibility. And the Zifrans hated it. Treshval, the leader of the Zifran delegation, stood rigid, his violet eyes sharp and unforgiving. He had already declared his judgment. The entity was an abomination, an anomaly that should not exist. And Veshkara was no longer Zifran. "You have defied nature," he said coldly. Veshkara, still weak, forced herself to stand. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to kneel. "Not to them. Not to anyone. I have not defied nature," she rasped. "I have been forced to experience it." Lisa and Carter stood close by, their hands subtly near their weapons. They weren't sure if this was about to turn into a diplomatic standoff or a fight to the death. Lisa's voice was firm. "She's not your enemy. And neither is that child." Treshval's gaze barely flickered toward her. "It is not a child." His voice was devoid of emotion. "It is an error, a mistake, an experiment that must be corrected." Veshkara felt something unexpected stir inside her chest. Rage. Not the cold, detached irritation she had once known. No. This was something raw, something primal. She clenched her fists. "You are afraid." Treshval's expression did not change, but his fingers twitched slightly. A microscopic movement, but in Zifran culture, it was the equivalent of a human flinch. Veshkara stepped forward. "I was like you once," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I believed pain was weakness, that suffering was a flaw." She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had clawed at the floor, that had grasped at reality as her body had been torn apart by a process she never thought she'd endure. "I was wrong." Lisa swallowed hard, recognizing the shift in Veshkara's tone. This wasn't just a personal revelation. This was a rebirth. Veshkara lifted her gaze, locking eyes with Treshval. "Pain is not weakness. It is evolution." The golden violet child flickered beside her, as if sensing the moment. Its body pulsed with unstable energy, still shifting between forms, still learning what it was meant to be. Carter exhaled, shaking his head in amazement. "She gets it now." Treshval, however, did not. The Zifran leader tilted his head slightly, studying Veshkara as though she were a broken machine. Then, in a calm, clinical tone, he spoke. "You are no longer one of us." The statement hung in the air, heavy as iron. Veshkara did not blink. "I know." Lisa tensed. "So what now? You kill her? You kill it?" She motioned to the child, her voice filled with disgust. "Because that's what your kind does, isn't it? You erase things you don't understand." Treshval's gaze shifted toward her. "We remove imperfections." Lisa's hands curled into fists. "You mean you erase progress?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, without warning, Treshval raised his hand. Lisa barely had time to register the movement before a pulse of dark energy shot forward, aimed directly at the entity. But before it could hit, Veshkara moved, faster than she should have been able to. Her hand snapped up, and to everyone's shock, she absorbed the energy. Lisa's eyes widened. What the hell? Veshkara's body glowed. The energy flowed into her, through her, as if her very cells were shifting, adapting, evolving. And then she fired it back. The counterattack slammed into Treshval, sending him staggering backward. The Zifran delegation moved in unison, stepping forward as if ready to strike. But Veshkara raised her hand again, and for the first time in Zifran history, they hesitated. She was not just one of them anymore. She was something else. Carter took a slow breath. Well, that just happened. Lisa swallowed hard. What did you just do? Veshkara let out a sharp growl, forcing her head up. Enough, she spat, her voice raw. I will endure this. Dr. Carter exchanged a look with Lisa. She's too stubborn to accept help. But she wouldn't last long. The contractions were coming faster now, her body trembling violently with each wave of pain. Her sharp nails raked across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Lisa turned back to the medical scanner, her eyes narrowing at the fluctuating readings. Something about the energy signature inside Veshkara wasn't normal. It wasn't a fetus. It was something different. And then, the room shook. A low, guttural vibration rippled through the air. The laboratory lights flickered again, and the emergency monitors began flashing erratic data streams. Veshkara let out a ragged breath, her body convulsing once more. But this time, something shifted inside her. Something alive. Lisa's heart pounded. "Carter, we have a problem." The scanner readings spiked wildly, and for the first time, a new sound filled the lab. A sound that sent a chill down every human spine. A low, inhuman heartbeat. Veshkara felt it too. Her eyes widened, her fingers tightening into fists as a look of absolute horror passed over her face. "This," she choked, "this is not supposed to happen." Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then what the hell is growing inside you?" Veshkara trembled, her mind struggling to comprehend. Her species did not carry offspring. They did not create life in this way. And yet, something inside her was alive. The monitors blared a new warning. "Foreign entity detected. Rapid development in progress." Dr. Carter stepped back, his mind racing. If it was growing this fast, then what would happen when it was born? Veshkara's body jerked violently, her head snapping back as a deep, guttural snarl ripped from her throat. The pain had transformed into something else, something primal. She was changing. Lisa grabbed Dr. Carter's arm. "We need to stop this. Now." But before they could move, Veshkara let out one final, agonized scream. The room was swallowed in a pulse of energy, blinding white light flooding every corner of the lab. The sound of shattering glass and metal filled the air. And in the middle of it all, where Veshkara had been writhing in pain, something else had taken her place, alien in labor. A pulse of energy rippled through the lab, knocking over equipment and sending sparks flying from overloaded circuits. The red emergency lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The once sterile lab now felt like something out of a nightmare, a place where logic and science had lost control. Dr. Carter shielded his eyes from the blinding light, his ears ringing from the explosion of energy. For a moment, everything was silent. The lab monitors were dead. The Zifran scientists stood frozen, and Lisa's sharp breaths were the only sound he could register. Then, a guttural, primal growl cut through the silence. Carter turned toward the source, his stomach tightening as he took in the scene before him. Veshkara was no longer on the floor. She was floating. Her body hovered a few feet above the ground, her limbs twitching as if she were being pulled in different directions by an invisible force. The sleek silver of her skin glowed unnaturally, the color shifting in waves, flickering between Zifran physiology and something else entirely. Something new. Her violet eyes snapped open, but they were no longer hers. A second pair of irises had formed within them, glowing with a faint golden hue. Lisa grabbed Carter's arm. What the hell is happening to her? Carter could only shake his head. "I don't know. This isn't just a pregnancy. Something's rewriting her DNA." A sudden, bone-deep crack echoed in the room. Veshkara's body jerked violently, her back arching as a new wave of contractions racked through her. Her fingers clawed at the air, her breathing now erratic, desperate. "I will not let this control me," she snarled through gritted teeth, but her voice was wrong. It sounded layered, as if two voices spoke at once. Lisa's face paled. She's fighting it. Her body is rejecting whatever's growing inside her. Carter's mind raced. The neural sync device had been designed to mimic pain, to allow one species to experience another's biology. But this wasn't just mimicry anymore. The machine hadn't just cinced her with human childbirth. It had transformed her into something capable of it. It spoke in perfect, flawless Zifran. "I am new." The sound sent a shudder through the room. Lisa felt her mouth go dry. Did it just? The child turned to Veshkara, its golden-violet gaze unreadable. "I am you." The ticking clock. Lisa stepped backward, bumping into the console. Okay. This is getting way too freaky." Carter grabbed the med scanner, scanning the child again. But now, the readings were off the charts. Holy hell. It's not just growing. It's evolving by the second. Veshkara remained still. Yes. Lisa turned to her, eyes wide with alarm. And you're okay with this? Veshkara finally looked at them, and for the first time, there was hesitation in her gaze. I do not know what I am supposed to feel. Lisa let out a short, nervous laugh. You know what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like we should be terrified. Before anyone could respond, the lab's alarm system blared. Carter's stomach dropped. Oh, that can't be good. Lisa turned toward the door and immediately saw why. The Ziphrans were coming back. A sharp metallic hiss echoed as the doors began unlocking. Carter muttered, I hate when I'm right. Lisa whirled toward Veshkara. We have to get out of here. Now. Veshkara looked down at the child. It was still staring at her, unblinking. She hesitated. Carter's voice was urgent. Veshkara, if they take it, they'll kill it. They'll kill you too. She clenched her jaw. I know. Lisa grabbed her arm. Then move. But before they could run, the child lifted its hand. Veshkara stiffened. Wait. A sudden burst of energy shot outward. The entire room distorted, the walls warping as if time itself had shifted. Then, just as the Ziphrans stormed in, they vanished. Into the unknown. The cold sterility of the lab was gone. The hum of sci-fi 9's engines was no longer there. Lisa gasped, stumbling forward as her vision adjusted. Where the hell are we? The answer came as soon as they looked up. Above them stretched a sky that wasn't a sky. It was a kaleidoscope of shifting stars, swirling colors, and cascading lights that bent in impossible directions. They weren't in normal space anymore. They were somewhere else. Carter's breath caught in his throat. Did the kid just teleport us? Veshkara turned to the child. What did you do? The entity tilted its head. I saved us. Lisa exhaled sharply. Okay. Cool. Great. We have an all-powerful shape-shifting baby that can warp reality. Carter ran a hand down his face. Yeah, that's not terrifying at all. Veshkara stared at the child. You knew. The entity looked at her, its golden-violet gaze flickering with something unreadable. And then, it smiled. Lisa groaned. I have a bad feeling about this. Carter sighed. Same. Veshkara, however, did not flinch. Because for the first time, she truly understood. This was only the beginning. A new species had just been born. And the universe was not ready for it.